Good morning, Professor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome on board. So, today I will bring a hypothesis that I came up myself. That's about brain memory and language. So, about the content. First, we will do a very small experiment on language memory retrieval, and to see how it works, how we retrieve the memory of language. And second, I will talk briefly about how language exists in our brain. Then we will discuss about selective aphasia, which is a language disorder with we lost the function for one language, for one specific language. And then I will summary and what have we had so far, and then what's the next move. I will discuss about what's the knowledge gap and what we need to do in the near future. So first let's come to the experiment on language memory retrieval. Let me have Jean. Can I have you for a moment, please? Okay, you come up here. Thank you. So I want you to just come here, and then I want you to close your eyes. And think for me about a fruit. What color it is?
Green.
Green. So is that the latest fruit that you ate recently?
No.
No? So what's that fruit?
Apple.
Apple. So is that your favorite fruit?
No.
No. So please come back. So what we have so far, what's interesting here, Jean have an apple in her mind, and she can retrieve the characteristic of the apple, which is green. And I ask her two things: is that her favorite fruit? She say no. And I ask her about, is that the latest fruits that she has so far? She had no to. So what's the latest fruit that you had recently?
Banana.
Banana. So we have banana here. Banana. So it's interesting because apple and banana is all fruit. And when I say, give me a fruit, how you retrieve that memory? How appears the apple instead? Why don't it appears the image of banana instead of the apple in your mind? So that's my question. So what do I think? Is memory space for languages designed at layers? And if so, do layers characteristic explain for memory storing or retrieving capability? What does it mean? Why choose layers? So imagine that you put things into a box. There are always two ways of putting things into a box. First, you just pick it up, throw it into the box randomly. So that would be a mess like this. And the second way is you arrange it, and then you put that into a box. So that always be layers. So there's always two things. But because if I choose randomly randomly order, I couldn't explain it. But if I choose layers have characteristic. And what I want to do is I try to prove that it will have the characteristic of layers. And if not, it will be this one. There's only two options. So what if memory space of languages is designed as layers? It's three characteristics. Imagine that you have, a layers of papers like this. So, if you want to retrieve, especially this layer, on this layer, it must to be retrieved in reverse chronological order. Why? Because when, for example, when you store the memory, For example, you have the event of yesterday and you have the event of present. Yesterday and present, like this. So when you retrieve it, put present first, put the yesterday later. So if the layers are interchangeable, for example, there's something in the past on this layer and present on this layer. If there's some event in the past and you want to retrieve it, there is an indirect factor that alters their order. So there will be a factor that changes this layer up here, and then you retrieve it. And the third characteristic is the index of various types of information. For example, image, audio, for the same object must be identical. Which means, for example, you have the image of a dog in your mind here, the image of a dog. So the word dog and the sound of a dog must be on the same plane, on the same layers. So that's the characteristic if the language is designed as layers. So what I'm trying to do here is to prove them, to prove every characteristic. So that if I can prove every characteristic of layers, I can prove that the memory space of language is designed as layers. So which clue did I find from my question? So firstly, we talk about very briefly about how language exists in our brain. So as you can see on this image, our brain there's a lot of region that plays an important role in language. So what we are trying to say is the language comprehension and language production. That we have the perception, we perceive something, and then we store it in our mind, knowledge and reasoning, and then when we talk, when we write, that's a language production. It's just go back. Okay? And remember, I want you to remember this image because there's some region of the brain that will take a very important role in aphasia. Why I say aphasia is an unexpected clue because there's some symptoms of aphasia very interesting, and it gives us the clue to understand the characteristic of layers. And selective aphasia is a type of language disorder when there's a loss or impairment in one specific aspect or component of language, while other language functions remain relatively preserved. For example, if I'm a bilingual person, I'm fluent in French and English. When I get the selective aphasia for French, I couldn't comprehend it. But I can comprehend word and I can produce word in English. That's selective aphasia, just one of two or one of three language. And most of the selective aphasia, it affected on the third language, the second language, the third language, all the time the native language. Most of the case, they don't affect the mother tongue. So, this is the symptoms of aphasia. You have trouble in speaking, trouble in understanding speech, trouble in writing, and you can see that all the symptoms here affect the language comprehension and language production, right? And remember the brain region that plays important role in language processing, language storing that I showed you previously. You can say that if one of these regions is affected, it can lead to aphasia. And this image is the CT scan, and they collect many samples of patients who get aphasia, and they listed on the sampling. You can see here the red one here, right? The more red it is, the more the likelihood of having lesion on that region. So now I will present to you a mini case report. So we have a 41-year-old man, right-handed bilingual male, and his native in Arabic and very high proficiency in Hebrew. I will tell you about Arabic and Hebrew later, but let's look at his medical history. In May 2004, he was hospitalized with a sudden fever and confusion, and he was diagnosed with a herpes simplex virus infection of the brain. And while being treated, he suffered a massive intracranial hemorrhage in his left temporal lobe and requiring emergency surgery. Oh, sorry for the Vietnamese notes in here. And post-surgery, he developed a complication including epilepsy and aphasia. So let's look at his CT scan. As you can see, there's a massive hemorrhage here, okay, on the left temporal lobe. Why is it on the left? Because on the CT scan, you look from the feet to the head, not from the head to the feet, okay? So that's just about direction stuff. So this is the hemorrhage here. And here, this is the CT scan 9 months later. They make a hole here to take out the hemorrhage. You can see that it's discontinuous here. Okay. So let's come back to the clinical symptoms. Let's focus on the selective aphasia of him. So here's the table about the score indicating degree of language impairment in Arabic and Hebrew. So we can see here, although he was really proficient in Hebrew, now we can see that the fluency, the comprehension, the repetition, and the naming function of him on degree. And then score obtained on naming task in Hebrew is decreased too. Okay. The performance on visual abilities is okay, but performance on auditory task and phonological ability with counting letter and spell word recognition is impaired. What's funny that his impairment was more severe in Hebrew than in his native Arabic. And during therapy, he made more progress in Arabic than in Hebrew. So, I will give you a very quick look of Arabic and Hebrew and show you why it's very interesting. Both Arabic and Hebrew are semantic language. They use the root and pattern system for building words. For example, it's quite different from our alphabetical system. For example, in the French alphabet and in English alphabet, there's instances of vowels and consonant. But in the Arabic and Hebrew alphabet, they have root, which is like this. Okay, this is the root. And most of their alphabet are made from consonant. This is the root. Okay, and this is the pattern. Okay. So here we have the sound b, and here's the a. So here we have ba in Hebrew. And let's look at the Arabic. This is ba in Arabic. And we can say that both these three words in Arabic, they contain the sound ba. So that's why they call it a pattern. They see the pattern, not the letter like us. They see the pattern. So because These two languages, they have the same root and pattern system for building word. We believe that the way they storing the language in the brain, in his brain, are the same, right? But when he's impaired, when he get the aphasia, just only Hebrew is infected. See? So,
Then we have to go faster.
okay. So what have we had so far? So, consequence of layer hypothesis. So if getting aphasia, native language will have less likely to be affected. Why? Because we believe that the connection is building firmer and firmer in our native language. For example, you learn language when you were born and you have about 20 years of learning your native language, but you have about a few years of learning French or English. So the connection in your native language is firmer. So native language will have less likely to be affected. But second consequence, if native language is impaired rather than all the language in aphasia on a multilingual patient, there is an indirect factor explaining for the layers alternation. For example, here is your mother tongue, and here's in your second language. If you get aphasia, selective aphasia, for your mother tongue, there will be a factor that alter that layer on top, and then the aphasia affected. It will affect the mother tongue instead of the second language or the third language. Okay? And the third one, for objects that not perceived through the native language, when aphasia affected the non-native language, patient will be unable to retrieve information about those objects in the native language. For example, me myself, I'm Vietnamese. I don't have le frimpong, le patisserie in Vietnam. So if I got aphasia for French, for example, I will lose every information about that word, how it looks like, how it sounds in French, and I will lose all the memory about that. So that's the third consequence. And what do we have so far? Only the first one is supported, and the third and the second consequence, a lack of evidence. Why? What should we do next? Because we lack of the literal review about, okay, for example, what we need is a study on the property of language switching, the alternation of layers in bilingual individual, identifying the triggering factor for this phenomenon. Additionally, we need to investigate the necessary condition for languages switching to occur when these triggering factors are removed. Second, we need a study on patients with selective aphasia affecting their non-native language. And we collecting data on events perceived by patients in their non-native language and examining whether they can retrieve information about related objects in the native language or not. We lack these two information. We lack a paper about these two. So we couldn't conclude for the third and the second consequence of layers. And the third one, we lack a neuroimaging study on multilingual population focusing on specialized brain region responsible for processing each language, with particular emphasis on the overlapping areas between this language to identify where linguistic network interconnect. And the hypothesis is that linguistic memory is organized in layers. Therefore, if the connective region between two languages sustain mind damage, what would be the consequence? In 2023, we have a very interesting paper, and this paper tells that the visual region for languages is actually composed of several small cortical patches highly selective for reading. For example, we often have the brain like that, and in the textbook they often draw the region for language by very big batches. But this paper telling that these batches is made from very small batches and selective for reading for this region of visual. So imagine that we have a very big batches like this, and actually it's made from a very small batches. So if we have a needle, like this, and we do a very small damage to this batch only, what will happen? What will be the consequence? And that's what I'm interested about. What's the consequence if these batches are overlapping between French and English, for example? See, you see the idea? We have two notes right here, and we have a needle. We do this very minor damage. What is the consequence? So all the three questions that I propose here, the next one is just the way we brainstorm about, okay, is that layers or not? And now, at the present, I couldn't conclude, okay, whether it's layers or not. But if we can have enough paper on these three questions, and we can prove that the characteristic of layers for the language memory is correct. So there will be a very interesting region and of study for us to discover. And if you want to know about the application of this theory, for example, if we know that, okay, it's made from layers, we will have the tactics for patients with aphasia, and we could choose the language for rehab, for memory rehab. Okay, and that's all for my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.